now. So let's just dive right into it. Tell me about how you got to Oklahoma. What preceded that?
Sure. Yeah. So I always have been interested in sports, and I've always really liked to think about sports, whether that was me being a fan or me just being an athlete overthinking. And so I was a runner for a majority of my life, played soccer before that, but ended up going and running at Mississippi State during my undergrad. For my 4 years there, I enjoyed it. I was getting a psychology undergraduate degree. My mom always told me, like, hey, if you're going to get a psychology degree, you're going to go to grad school. So just think about it. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind. Wasn't really exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I started to rule out things I didn't want to do, which was a lot of things, as you can imagine, like being a 20-year-old, whatever, kid. And, one day I was just honestly getting kind of like sick of like the whole grad school search process, and ended up thinking like, well, what would I just want to do if I could just do anything? And I'm like, well, I'd want to work with athletes, and I just want to talk to them. And like, is that even a thing? So I like started searching Google. I found that sports psychology was in fact a thing. But 10 years ago, Division I universities weren't mandated to have folks like me on staff. And so we didn't even have one at Mississippi State, and I remember talking to my coach about that, and he was like, well, go to grad school. And also there's this guy at Missouri, Rick McGuire. Do you know him? I'm like, no, I don't know him. And so thankful that we were put in touch, because then I ended up going to Mizzou, got my master's in counseling with an emphasis in sport. Rick McGuire was a seminal person in my just journey, really, as a sports psychologist. And he was one of the people who always pushed me to say, listen, mental performance stuff is awesome and you'll always enjoy it, but you're going to want to work with all parts of the athlete, and you'll want to be a person who can help clinically as well as in the performance space. And so was pushed to get a PhD, and had completed my PhD now in counseling psychology again from UW Milwaukee. Oklahoma was my clinical internship. So spent, 40 hours a week doing sports psych stuff. It was mental performance work. It was clinical work. It was consulting with coaches, a lot of work with student athletes, other support staff. And then just more recently, accepted the position at Arizona. So I'm a sports psychologist at the University of Arizona. I work within our athletic department, doing much of the same things, working with athletes in the clinical and performance space, consulting with coaches, and I mean, anything else that just happens to fall into the psychologist lap. So long answer, but that's, I think, kind of how I got here.
So do you think that running track and field started that sports psychology roadmap for you, or do you think that it was just inherently something that you were interested in and your sport participation at a school kind of worked with it?
I think yes, and running is a mental game. You have a lot of time to think, unfortunately and fortunately. And really, I think a big shout out to my high school coach too, because he'd always push us to think about the 6 inches between the ears. And he would always talk about this other aspect of training, one that's a little less tangible, and that was the mental space. And so, yeah, definitely, I think the nature of running itself helped out with that, but also specifically my coach as well. So, yeah, I don't know. I often reflect back on it, and sometimes I go down the rabbit hole and I'm like, who cares? I enjoy it. So
So now that you're in Arizona, I mean, how did the Oklahoma to Arizona jump work? And are you prepared for, I mean, you said you were doing basically the same thing here as in Oklahoma, but what did you take from the Oklahoma job that you're using or planning on using in Arizona?
Yeah, so let's see, how did the jump happen? Well, a lot of interviewing around, a lot of connections of people, hey, there's an opening here, you should think about this kind of thing. And I knew Oklahoma was a 1-year situation. It was a clinical internship. Admittedly, if there's an opening there, I would have loved to say. I really enjoyed my colleagues. There are great things going on within that OU Pros department. Have nothing but good things to say. And actually, one of your previous guests, Alex Auerbach, was formerly at Arizona. And so we were loosely connected just through mutual colleagues, and had heard great things about Arizona, but Arizona hadn't been posted yet when we were chatting about things. So once the job was posted, he was a great person to pick his brain and hear all about this transition. It was rather smooth, I think, in all. It's weird because I would have never thought that a pandemic would make this work easier in any way. And certainly the challenges that my clients and all of us face are very real, and there's nothing to like poke at or laugh at or talk about how it's easy in that regard. But what I am trying to say is that I spent so much time virtual at Oklahoma, and we're continuing to do that at Arizona. It's kind of hybrid. We're seeing people in person. We're masked up, and lots of folks are vaccinated and other good things. But in some cases, the work is virtual, and so in one case, I was just sitting in front of the same computer, in Norman, Oklahoma, and now I'm here in Tucson, Arizona. And so the colors are different, the mascots are different, the colleagues are different, but the work remains really similar. A lot of adjustment related concerns. What happens to me now that I have a contact quarantine or a positive isolation? I miss my family. Or I think the new one is, especially for our sophomores, of saying, well, now things are kind of in person. I didn't have it in person last year. I don't really know how to do the college thing. Or the juniors who are saying, the last time I was on campus, I was a freshman, and now I'm expected to be a leader. So some new concerns, but at the same time, a lot of the similar presenting concerns.
It's so interesting that you mentioned Dr. Auerbach, because he was the one at the end of our interview. He referred me to Dr. Dolores Christensen, who then referred me to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting how small that the profession is, especially because you all start to know each other and refer people like me to each of you. And I think that's what's so fun.
Yeah, it's a small world. I was told that early on. The idea of like, once you see behind the curtain, you'll see that it's a lot of the same people. And I forget who told me that, but I mean, they were right, because it's not tiny. I mean, there's I think a couple hundred at this point, counseling or clinical and sports psychologists in some capacity, but it's a small world.
So let's talk about the work that you've done. You were mentioning clinical work, but you also have applied work with your CMPC. So how do you delineate what clients you take on?
Sure. Yeah. And so in the collegiate spaces, it's easy because anyone who walks through the door, come on, have a seat, let's chat. In that regard, it's a little easy. Outside of here, if I were to see anyone, it comes down really to risk, liability, and some like local ethics, and not local ethics, national ethics and local laws. So really how I delineate is if a concern is clinical, and I use heavy air quotes there because I think the line in the sand can be blurry for some folks, is like, for example, anxiety before an event, pre-performance anxiety. That's what the CMPC would want to call it. And sometimes a purely clinical person without any sport experience would want to say, oh no, that could be generalized anxiety disorder, that could be other specified, or that could be something very clinical. And so how I delineate it is the level of risk. So if there are suicidal thoughts, self-harm behaviors, things like that, homicidal ideation, that's a clinical space. That's something where the pure performance work maybe can't be done yet. If there's eating disorder, like symptomology that's very prevalent, that's going to be something where the work is just not ready to be done. And if it is, it could be in conjunction with a clinical person and a performance person. Also substance use. If substance use is the presenting concern and it's impacting our work together or impacting performance, that's going to be something where a clinical person should probably come in. Now, a lot of the stuff can be comorbid, right? There can be someone working through some body dysmorphia or some eating related concerns, and yet still be cleared to perform. And so a CPC person could come in and still do the confidence, composure, visualization, focus work, whereas the clinical person could be taking care of the other thing. And sometimes that split for athletes is super nice. And so that's how I delineate it outside of here. But again, if a student athlete at Arizona comes through the door, we'll work together unless it's clinically indicated to refer to a higher level of care.
So when you do have an athlete that you've never worked with before come through your door, what are the first questions that you ask for? And with those answers, what are you looking for? I mean, what kind of triggers do you see from those answers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that question because so often we get only clinical right away. Like everyone thinks I need to sit down and just unload my life story to this person. The first question I always ask is, "Hey, did you find me okay?" Campus is big; it can be a maze. Really, throughout the process, I try to humanize the experience and really have the client, the person who's receiving the treatment, feel seen, feel heard, feel validated. Because as much work as we have done and how much the stigma has come down in the mental health world, it can still be really nerve-wracking to be vulnerable sitting in that seat, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Initially, I do have to go through the jargon, though, of limits of confidentiality, all of the, what goes on in here stays in here with a few exceptions kind of spiel. And I do have to get a couple other just boring housekeeping items out of the way, just releases and things like that if necessary. But the first question that I think I've asked, thousands of times now, I don't know, is, hey, so I have a whole bunch of questions that I kind of have to ask you. But before I do that, I want to hear in your own words, like, what brings you in today? And I say it just like that. And from there, what I'm really searching for is where the person wants to begin and where they think the concern, really is manifesting. But also at the same time, I have some healthy amount of, I think, realism that the person may not want to tell me their deepest, darkest concern in that moment, and that's totally okay. And so that's a big question for sure that I ask. And then I kind of go through and ask about anxiety, depression, eating, sleep, substance use, other cultural factors that are important to them, the things they value as a person. I might be forgetting one that I'll remember later when I'm trying to fall asleep, but those are the big ones, because after we get through that initial intake, we go right back to that presenting concern. And a lot of times the questions that I asked all along the way meld together, and 20 minutes in the conversation, we can kind of be off to the races.
So when you have those clinical issues that are presenting as performance issues, because you're able to deal with both sides of that, when the athlete says, okay, this started in childhood, for example, do you let them talk, or do you say, let's steer it back toward the way it's impacting you now?
I let them go. I'll try to rein them in if it's been 30 minutes, but everyone's got a story, and that's a whole nother form of therapy, narrative therapy, one that I use a little bit here and there. It's not my primary modality, but everyone has a history, and sometimes it's really important, especially in certain cultures, to be able to tell the story and to talk about who they are as a person before talking about what's going on right now. And so that also gives me some good information, just that goes into their identity, their personality, who they are as a person, especially when we get to the college and post-collegiate age. A lot of folks have been doing their sport for 15 years by then, maybe more. And so, it's not uncommon to say, I've always just been screamed at and yelled at. And wow, I guess I've never considered that to be verbal abuse before. Yeah, I think that started when I was about 6. And so, I definitely let them go. Eventually, the conversation does, I think, come back to the same spot of, we can spend hours and hours going back and trying to figure out why something has happened. But oftentimes, even though if we know why, we're still experiencing it now. And so why don't we find a way to manage the stuff now moving forward? So a little bit of both. I don't ever shut anyone down, but there's a time and a place, I think.
So who makes the first contact? Is it normally a coach coming to you and saying, we may have an issue performance-wise with this athlete, and then it turns out that you uncover some clinical issue? Or is it an athlete coming to you and saying, help me, something's wrong?
For sure. Of course, a little bit of both. And other folks in the system too. So especially here at Arizona, we have a comprehensive, very integrative network of care. So we look at it as a student athletes in the middle. And so someone like me is on the outside, an athletic trainer is on the outside, physician, dietitian, strength coach, gosh, I'm missing folks. Anyone, academic folks, life skills folks, like these are all people who come in contact with the athlete every single day and probably see the athlete more than I do, unless I'm at that practice or something. But again, that athletic trainer is going to see them more than I will. And so sometimes it's the coach reaching out and saying, hey, I think something's going on with so-and-so. Would you reach out to them? And sometimes it's the coach literally walking over with the student athlete. Sometimes that's a feel-good moment that both are saying this is something that could be helpful. And sometimes it's the student athlete feeling pushed into it a little bit, and that presents its own dynamic. A lot of times, a student athlete is the one that ends up reaching out, a lot of times via email in our secure network and saying, hey, I was referred to you guys, or hey, I've been struggling with some stuff. Can I talk to someone? It literally just looks like that. And then later on in the conversation, it's like, oh yeah, my athletic trainer told me to email you. It's like, okay. Yeah.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into the sphere that you were referring to that has coaches and athletic trainers and tutors and all of these support staff.
Mm-hmm.
How many people for one student athlete would you venture to say come in contact with them at least once a week?
Oh, once a week. I mean, 10 is a very conservative guess. 15 could feel maybe on the upper end of that. And really, of course, and I'm trying not to say it depends about everything, but it does, like some student athletes are meeting with the learning specialist and their academic counselor and a tutor. So there's 3, and that's just academics, right? And then if they're seeing the psych, well, that maybe they're seeing me, or maybe they saw my colleague and then they referred to me, right? Like it can be a lot.
So where do you fit in terms of consulting with that sphere? I mean, how frequently are you talking to the athletic or the academic advisors versus the support staff on the physical side?
Mm-hmm. So this is like the golden question. I think that when in grad school, you're not always taught this part, and this is really the it's not, I don't want to say murky. It's not murky at all, but it's, you need to know ethics and you need to know when you can talk to someone and when you can't. For so long in the clinical space, it's been don't talk to anyone unless there's a formal release signed. And that's still the case. Our student athletes do sign a lot of paperwork and they're informed of these performance meetings that we have. So it's not like anything's going on behind anyone's back. But the thing that I encourage everyone to think about is who was the referral source. And so if even if the coach or athletic trainer or whoever refers a student athlete to like myself or one of our sports psych people, the referral source has the right to know that the client, the student athlete, has been followed up with. That's just a good quality of care kind of component. Beyond that, now it'll depend. So if there are specific eating disorder concerns, we have an EATS team here where a dietitian will be there, a physician is on that meeting, a psychologist is on that meeting, and then it rotates in depending on who the student athlete is and what team they're a part of. So the athletic trainer for that team would likely be there. Sometimes the strength coach is there, sometimes not. And really, this is only the people who come in contact with the student athlete and who are aware of the concern are on that call. So in this case, like the coach would not be on that call. They may say, hey, thank you for referring so-and-so. They did show up for services. I'll take it from here. I'll let you know if we need to rope you in. Usually that's good enough for a little while. Otherwise, it's that team. And we talk very openly about care and how we can try to keep moving forward with things. And then there's could be a whole nother one relating to academic concerns. Those are a little bit less HIPAA protected. Academics only loosely falls in the clinical space. So those could be like the learning specialists, the academic support, the academic counselors. We have those meetings. So like we call them performance enhancement teams. And there are many, many of those meetings. So I think the big thing is just remembering that, to keep the dignity of that person in mind and to respect that person. Those are two of the big 5 just core ethics codes there, because, a prime example is on that eats team, someone could be flagged for an eating disorder, and we're talking about that work and we're doing that work. And I'm also doing gender identity work with that person. That's the work I don't need to bring into that space. That work remains confidential because it really doesn't have anything to do, well, it could have something to do, but it doesn't have everything to do with that eating disorder. And it would do more harm than good to talk about that, because I haven't been given the clearance to talk about that. So that's where it gets murky, because sometimes people are like, well, why can't they just blank? And in your mind, you're like, I know why, but that doesn't apply to this, so I can't share it. So then there's a delicate dance to play and all that.
So you've talked a couple of times about this eating disorder component.
Mhm.
Is that what a lot of athletes are dealing with currently? I mean, have you seen an uptick in recent years of eating disorders? And is there a reason?
Sure. Yeah. I don't really even know if it's an uptick so much as it's under talked about. And oftentimes it's talked about in women, in sports where body image can be a component of the game. So like gymnastics is a classic example. But it really is a hidden concern a lot of times, because you can meet criteria for an eating disorder and not, again, heavy air quotes, look like you have an eating disorder. And so, and if it's not an eating disorder, there's disordered eating. And so this is kind of the step before that, where some criterion is met, there is some disturbance in your life because of body image or eating or something like that, but it's not the primary concern. And so, yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's the one thing that when I talk to people outside of the sports med world or the sports psych world, when I say like, oh yeah, a lot of guys struggle with the way that they see their bodies, or a lot of guys have difficulties fueling their bodies to perform adequately because of stress, anxiety, could be any depression, could be body image, doesn't have to be body image, they can be separate. I think that's surprising. They say, really, guys, are you sure? Or are they just saying that? It's like, no, they definitely are experiencing that. So yeah, no, it's very, it's prevalent, I would say, across the board in every sport. It's just talked about more in certain sports.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have an episode interviewing a dietitian, because I think that I've done an episode on this athlete who was playing 2 Division I sports and developed disordered eating and hid it from her teammates in an effort to just look better in her mind.
Mhm.
And she was masking it by playing 2 sports and giving away her carbs and just doing all of these things that no one picked up on.
Mhm.
And so it finally came to a head when one of her other teammates expressed feeling the same way that she did. And so they went together, and no
Nice.
one else knew. I mean, this wasn't an issue that she had told her coaches or a sports psychologist about, but it
Mhm.
took her teammate coming to her and seeing her as a leader, even though she was struggling with this thing in silence. And her
Mhm.
teammate came to her and said, I'm having these issues. And then she said in turn, I am too. Let's go talk to someone.
Right, right. And how much strength it took each of them, one to say it to begin with, and the other to say, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
No, I think that talking about it from even the pure dietitian standpoint could be really interesting because there are so many misnomers where that are learned along the way. And I'll stay in my lane and I won't try to speak to them, but I often hear, and whether it was Mizzou or Oklahoma or now here at Arizona, dietitians always saying like, heavy eye roll. Yep, heard it a million times. That's just not helpful. And so, yeah, I think people could benefit from that.
So is it your job then to change the dialogue relating to a potential eating disorder, or is that something that that athlete would go to the dietitian to work with? I mean, how does the terminology change from your perspective?
Terminology in terms of what?
In terms of the way that an athlete who was experiencing disordered eating would look at treatment styles.
Got it. Got it. So I think it's really up to all of us in the system to be educated on what things we can say and what things are maybe triggers. So I don't know that it's specifically my or the sports psychologist's job to change all of the dialogue, but I do think we have a responsibility to be part of that change. And really, I say that not to like dance around the fire, but really because I think it really does take a team to make that kind of change. And so as I can speak on it from the even the biopsychosocial aspect of it. So, because psychology impacts biology in a lot of ways and kind of back and forth, and we all live in a social sphere. As I can talk to the impacts of eating and body image and concerns between concerns between different coaching dynamics and athlete dynamics, that's an important part. But then it's up to the dietitian to say, hey, this is how we can do it. And then it's up to the administrators to say, hey, this is important. Why don't we push this? And then it's up to the coaches to say, oh, wait, yeah, that is important, right? So I think it's part of all of it. But at the same time, I think a lot of the conversations eventually in eating disorder work become similar between the dietitian and a psychologist. Like a lot of dialogue is very open and talked about in the same way. But I think early on there can be some gravity toward one or the other, that no, I want to talk to my dietitian more about this, and they're like, you need to talk to the psychologist about it. And sometimes it's the other way where and this is when it's important as a former student athlete to stay in my own lane, because especially talking to runners, like I can quickly kind of feel to go down that route of like, oh yeah, like we can talk about fueling, and it's like, no, I'm not their running coach, I'm not their training partner, I'm their psychologist. This is the role of the dietitian. And so, yeah, the dialogues are always different, always different.
So, what do most athletes come to you seeking?
Hmm. It's a really good question. Help, I think, is the answer, really. I wanted to say validation, but it's really not validation. I think a lot of people think that people come to therapy or come to a performance consultation just to be validated, that to be told they're right. But really, oftentimes it's not. It's, hey, this thing's going on and I don't know what to do about it. And so I think they come to process. I think they come to find answers. Uh, Whether I'm the one teaching that or not is another conversation, because there are specific mental skills that I think can be taught in a rather straightforward manner, that can be really effective and definitely helpful. And yet, when it isn't a focus thing, an attention thing, a confidence thing, sometimes it's a little bit grayer. And even grief work or trauma work, in that regard, it's, I want help, but I don't want you to teach me anything. I just want to be able to talk and process through it. And again, these kind of ends of the spectrum is why I love the work, because if I had all performance work all the time, I would feel like something's missing. I would want to have some kind of clinical feel, maybe a little deeper. Not that performance work isn't deep, because it definitely is. But then the other way too, like sometimes the clinical stuff gets super, super heavy, and it's nice to hop into the performance world and be like, where are we with our focus drills? Like, let's get back into that. So, yeah.
So you also mentioned just now the difference between teaching and consulting. Where do
Mhm.
you draw the line on that delineation?
Mhm. So, I think that there could be even more, right? So there's teaching, there's consulting, and then there's the processing, there's the clinical work, there's the reflecting kind of stuff. And so I oftentimes just ask straight up, because the nature of this work is that uh, by the time someone gets, especially outside of a collegiate setting, by the time someone gets to a sports psychologist, they're generally ready to work. Like they're said, hey, a lot of times they've gone to someone that they thought they had good online recommendation or something, but maybe weren't trained formally in it, and they worked with different coaches and mentors, and finally they get to the psychologist and they're like, I'm done with everything else, like let's just get into it. So the reality of it is that a lot of times we end up doing the work within a session or two, and maybe the work is done within 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions. And so delineating it is important. Knowing my role is important. So early on, I like to just kind of cut the crap and say like, hey, what is it that you're looking for here? We've ruled out a lot of these concerns, especially when they're not clinical. We've ruled out a lot of these concerns. You know, you just want to work through something. Do you want to learn something? And at that point, a lot of times the personality and identity comes through of like, yes, I need to learn how to focus better. Okay, then I'm teaching. If it's, no, I think I have a pretty good grasp on it. I just need some guidance along the way. That's consulting. And so consulting to me is kind of bringing forward some ideas, meeting the client where they are. They can take it on and master it. And I'm kind of the sounding board. They can bounce the idea off me. Teaching is, hey, let's kind of formally or informally assess where you're starting. Here's how, and I like to inform them, here's how I think we're going to be moving forward. I say think because there's a wiggle room a lot of times. Let's assess along the way and let's continue to improve. And then it becomes the like teacher student dynamic a bit, but I always try to make it a little bit more egalitarian, because at the end of the day, as I often tell most of my clients after the first session, we're just two people sitting in a room or two people on a Zoom screen talking. So let's just, find a way to connect.
So now that you are off Zoom, I mean, what kind of body language cues are you picking up now that you wouldn't have been able to over a screen?
Yeah, well, I mean, all the stuff below the shoulders, really. And some, I mean, I guess I can't not clinically say, I mean, psychomotor agitation is the big word, leg jiggling, things like that, or leg shaking. I don't know. That's like a big one that I like totally forgot that people like might be doing in these sessions. Also, like a lot of people have maybe their hands together, but like they're down. So like right now, you can't tell what I'm doing with my hands. Well, a lot of times people are like squeezing their hands, cracking their knuckles. That can be definitely a sign of anxiety. Other just overall body posture. That's a big one, where a lot of times the student athlete is in the car, they're outside somewhere that they feel is confidential enough, or they're sitting in bed or even laying on their bed. And so like those are all situations that are very atypical, even in sports psychology. I mean, there's nothing typical about sports psychology as compared to my other clinical peers. Um, and even now that we're back in the office, we're almost as much out of the office, meeting, student athletes after practice. You're walking in the car, or in the trenches is the big, sports psych adage, as I know um, so but yeah, but I think that like leaning and the like other things where you're like, oh, there's something going on here. We're tense. It's kind of nice to be able to have all that information again, to be honest.
So now we've talked about how an athlete's body language can impact the information that you gather from their sessions. How does that change when you add, for example, an entire team that you're consulting with at once? I mean,
Well,
how do the triggers that you're seeing manifest in a team environment?
hmm I love it. I love that question because sometimes the body language is a way to definitely formally communicate excitement or concern about what I'm saying, or even like boredom, right? And I'm not too proud to say that I'm sure in a 60 or 80 person team, I've lost people, and they're like looking at their teammates like, oh my gosh. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I think a lot of times though, as you get to know teams pretty well, you can call it out a little bit. Again, you're not making fun of someone as much as you're bringing them into the conversation, and you got to know that person. You got to know how they're going to respond in front of all of their teammates. But that can be really impactful. Of sometimes we're talking about the specific concern, and someone's actually doing it, and so it's fun to work through, and then to kind of keep your eye on them and notice like, oh, something's changing. And sometimes it's just like, hey, you want to be my demonstration today? And they're like, oh shoot, yeah, all right, like let's do it. And in which case it's fun to bring them in. So yeah, and I mean, again, that's still an early answer though for me, because we're still hybrid. I mean, especially with everything that's been going on, that some stuff is definitely in person, but some stuff is still via Zoom.
So when you have a coach contact you about working with an entire team, do they have a specific thing that they want to work on, like for example, team cohesion or a general focus that they see their team lacking, or are they entrusting you to do some kind of across the board beginner style sports psych lesson or just something else?
I think it's a 50-50. Well, it's never 50-50, but it's split somewhere down there, right? Because, I've had coaches over the past 3-4 years to reach out with a very, very specific concern. I think my least favorite are the right before a championship and saying, hey, we need to get our heads right. Can we bring you in? In which case, like, you'd almost be better to bring in like a drill sergeant to like give like a pep talk or something. I do that work, and it can still be effective. I'm not trying to like put down those coaches. Some sessions have been really impactful when it's the end of the season and something specific happened that they couldn't have planned for. It's not that the coach put it off. They just didn't expect this to happen. Oh, hey, can you come in? We got to process through this, and we've got a state meet or a regional championship in 3 days. Yeah, sure. Okay. There are the fair bit, especially now that sports psych's getting the traction that it is. Coaches reaching out and saying, hey, I've seen a lot of other teams have sports psychologists or work with sports psychologists. We'd love to bring you in which case then it's the follow-up question of, hey, okay, cool, what are you looking for? And I love having coach consults early, just to say, this is your program. I may be here 1 hour one time. I might be here 3 hours a week for 15 weeks, but in either case, it's your vision and you're seeing the student athletes more than me. And so then it's working with them to, again, most times there it's more informally assess what's going on. I like to do a strengths and weaknesses kind of assessment, just going down mental skills. Hey, what's going well? Also depends on the size of the team. If it's like a football team and you've got 80, 90, 100 guys on off the roster or something, that's a totally different feel than maybe a golf team that isn't capped even on their head count. And so again, very different, because if it's a football or a track or a swim situation, even baseball, I'll throw that one in there. A lot of times it's, hey, let's break up based on event group or position group, to do that work separately. So we do keep the student athletes engaged. So we are doing the work, versus if it's maybe a golf team or something, it's, I'll meet you out on the tee box on one, like, we'll figure this out. So a little bit of different, but I think it's changing now that sports psych's gaining traction. I think that's probably my main takeaway with that one.
So let's talk about the demographic of your clientele. How much work do you do outside of your position within the athletic department of a D1 institution?
It varies. I would say less than 10 hours a week. But it could, when you see people outside of here, especially virtual, there's a lot less prep and a lot less on the back end too. So maybe even just 10 hours. It's ebbed and flowed though. I can certainly say that in the past few years, it's been 20 hours a week. It's especially with travel pre-COVID. I mean, 20 was a nice estimate. It would be higher. So yeah, I think that's probably the number. A demographic standpoint, I think that's a big growth edge for our field as a whole, myself included. I think especially the way that it's laid out from a financial standpoint, sports psych services aren't covered by insurance, and so they quickly become out of pocket. And because they're boutique services and performance only services, the rate can be moderate to high enough to scare away clients, and I'm not saying only myself, just in general. I've had these conversations with my colleagues. And so just even by nature of the financial aspect of the privilege, but also the privilege of time, we start to look at majority. We can see, I think I see probably more white people than people of color. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up for someone to talk about or to debate. I don't think it's a good thing. I can tell you that. And I'm also not trying to make the discrepancy between people of color having no money and white people having a lot of money, because certainly the tables can be turned in every which way in all of these intersections. But in a typical and stereotypical way, in sports psych, I think a lot of clientele are white and people of privilege, unless brought in by a team. And that's an active thing that our association, the Association for Applied Sports Psych, has been trying to battle against. Of how do we make sports psych services more accessible? How do we get more representation in sports psychology? I think to me, that's actually probably one of the major concerns and one of the things we should do most, because as we know from Bandura, the modeling effect, when we look up, so upward comparison, who do we see who can help me? And does that person have anything that relates to anything like me? Do they look like me? Do they come from the same places as me? Do they do the same work as me? Because that leads to trust and security and allows us to do the work really well. And so, really kudos to our organization for taking some very active and serious steps forward in that. But I think that's something that our field still struggles with. That being said, other demographics, age, I would say outside of here, I see more high schoolers than I see anyone. Other than, it skips, it's like high school or post-collegiate. Like I see no other collegiate student athletes. It's just, they probably have their own sports psych and it's already paid for the university. So that's probably why, I don't know.
So when you're looking at an athlete coming to you for the first time, how do you build trust in the event that what they're going through is something that you've never worked with any other athlete on?
Sure. Well, I think the first part of that question is the part that hits home, because I don't know if they'll know if I've ever worked with someone in their particular case or not. It's not something that I would even necessarily disclose. And really, because at this point, concerns fall under most boxes of things I've worked with. And so every case is different. So it's like this dichotomy of like, oh, like I've done lots of work in trauma, but every trauma is very, very unique. And so it's like honoring that for that survivor, but also recognizing like, really the way we're going to treat this is going to be maybe pretty similar, but very unique, so, but the trust piece is so big. And really, I think it's all about interpersonal communication early. It's honesty, it's saying something and then following up with it, even within the first session of saying, and this is a great example of, my first question to them, my first formal question being, hey, tell me about what's bringing you in today. And then when they get done with that and we talk about it a little bit, I say, hey, is it okay if I get to all those questions that I kind of have to get to? Yeah, for sure. Okay, but we will come back to this. Okay, sounds good. So there it is. I've told them, hey, we're going to come back to this. And if I don't allot enough time in my mind for this session and to bring that presenting concern back in, then I'm losing, at least I'm not gaining trust. I might be losing trust. And so to be able to then say, hey, okay, does it feel okay to bounce back to that first thing we talked about? Yeah, for sure. Okay, boom. So now you're saying something and you're following up. Um, I think the other thing is not to make false promises. I don't, maybe early when I was like a master's practicum student or something, maybe I made this mistake, but I never tell anyone anything definitive we're gonna fix you, or well, they're not broken, but I don't even know what the examples would be, but I do like to end saying like, hey, I think we're going somewhere with this, and I think there's a lot of work we can do, or hey, I'm hopeful. I like to share those things, but I don't like to make false promises because none of us can predict the future, and a lot of times those are things we're talking about: wanting to predict the future, having too much control, and not being able to do it.
So let's talk about your applied work.
Mhm.
You have mentioned in the past visualization and how important that is for senses of calm and senses of control. How often are you creating visualization scripts for your athletes?
I think that's probably one of my go-tos. How often? Tough to say. But I probably find myself going through it at least once a week with one of my student athletes. I mean, sometimes it's 3 times, 3 hours in a row, and then you're like, wow, I'm getting good at this. But visualization is awesome because it really does blend the neuropsychology worlds with the psychology worlds and biology and all the good stuff. And so I would say often, and I would say more in the performance world than the clinical world, like 95-5 or 90-10 performance over clinical. But sometimes I like to borrow from that toolbox too.
So, define for someone listening who may be interested in the services that you have the difference between visualization and imagery.
Sure. I think that some of my colleagues may beat me up for this, but for the sake of the applied work, I call them one and the same, to be honest. I think that there's some good science out there in delineating some of the differences, but in my mind, they're synonyms. So if someone says, I want to do imagery work, I want to do visualization work, to me, that means that you're wanting to see something in your mind's eye more clearly. And there are ways that we're going to do that. And so how I define either really is just, using your mind to see something more clearly, in real time, and in the service of performing better, and reminding them that it's a trainable skill.
So, if someone was to come in and ask for a visualization or an imagery script, where do you begin?
Mhm. So that's like the info gathering part, and really, I think that's one of the more fun parts of the job, because then we get to throw away all of the like formal everything, and it's like, okay, let's try to really hyper focus on one thing. And so let's use a pitcher. This is a more recent one. Pitchers go into pretty important showcase, and this is somewhere that they've thrown before, which is a good thing. But they're feeling really nervous. It's really important. It's the timing is kind of having to happen. Okay, fine. So I say, let's go online. You go on Instagram and Twitter, you on your phone, you know where to find it. I'll go on Google and just try to find it. And I literally try to find a picture of the place that they're going to be. Because we live in 2021, it's a lot easier than you think. Sometimes even obscure tracks in Europe, when we've got someone going overseas, it's like, let's find it. And then can we find a picture from the start line? Yeah, a lot of times we can. Sometimes it's going on YouTube and finding like a virtual walkthrough and just pausing it, getting the screenshot, and there's the unique picture for the client. So getting some visual data is really, really important. So that's usually step one, because that can cut the nerves, that can be fun, that can be all of the, and it's really important because we're going to pull from it like almost immediately. Then I like to have the student athlete talk to me about the context, the environment. Talk to me about it. Is it warm? Is it hot? Is it sunny? Is it too cold because it's climate controlled? Talk to me about all the sensory stuff that you know. What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? How does the turf feel under your feet? Is it concrete right under the turf, or do you have some rubber under the turf? Is it soft? Just really pulling from all that kind of stuff. And I tell them straight up at the beginning, hey, if you don't know something, it's okay if you don't know. It'd be better to say you don't know than to guess or to lie, because we're heavily depending on your memory on this. So, okay, if you don't know it. Okay, great. So we get into it, get all the information. And then I like to actually just ask them to walk me through what typically happens. And I like to, in my mind, explore the spectrum. Okay, so this is what typically happens. What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? Because again, I'm going to be the one guiding them. And I've never thrown a fastball at 95 miles an hour. I don't know what that's like. But if you give me a lot of good information, I can kind of push you through the door, and their brain is going to take care of the rest. And so lots of information gathering. But again, this whole process we talked about might only take 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's not an hour, at least not most times. So from there, I ask them if they feel comfortable, close their eyes. I think a lot of times it's yes, but in either case, I would say, well, I'm going to look over here. Go ahead, close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And I really never look at them. So I assume they close their eyes. I don't know. And I say, okay, take a couple deep breaths, however you naturally know how. And they do. If we've already gone through some breathing stuff in the past, I try to lean on that. Okay, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Sometimes I guide it through them anyway. A lot of kind of basic beginner kind of mindful breathing kind of techniques. And this is really just to calm the system down, because ultimately we want to control, if we can, as much of their internal ability to see things and feel things as we can, and let the rest of the clutter just be there, just naturally dissipate, go away. In an ideal world, they're hearing my voice, but even my voice is starting to drown out as they're getting deeper and deeper into the script. And yeah, from there we just started. And so I like to, they've gotten centered for maybe 30, 40 seconds. And I just, at that point, I have a lot of information. So I don't say I wing it, but I kind of just say like, all right, so, it's Saturday the 23rd, you're this and this, and you're this and this, and this is what you're describing. I've got the picture I'm looking at, I'm describing it. And then I say, and then whatever it is, I lead them up to it. And as soon as I can no longer, as soon as it would be not beneficial for me to talk about what they're doing, because it would slow the process down. For instance, pitching, like I'm not going to say ever to them, like, notice your wrist over your elbow and notice your hand releasing. You'd already be on pitch number 2 by then, right? So I like to set up the context, and then I tell them, hey, go ahead, go through 3 pitches. When you're done, take a deep breath, open your eyes. Then we debrief. Hey, how'd it go? A lot better than I think. Okay, what does that mean? Take some notes down, and then we get some reps. And really, I try to hyper focus the visualization as we can. But the exception, this is a long-winded answer, but the exception being like in endurance sports. For instance, I had some 500-meter swimmers who they were doing some visualization scripts. And really the cool thing was, by the end of the season, I would set the context up. They'd be lying on the floor, lights are down, just a few of them. And I'd say, all right, you're on the blocks, and then we'd sound an alarm because we had one there, and boom, and they would go into it. And honestly, it was incredible that each of them would finish their visualization within 5 seconds of their actual goal time. Like, and this is minutes and minutes of their visualization. It's not 30 seconds. It's 4 minutes, 5, whatever it was. And like the number 1 swimmer finished before the other ones, but not excessively. And you're like, wow, very, very crisp.
I was hoping that this was going to be a long-winded answer.
Yeah, okay.
So let's also dive into what kind of, I guess, goes into that storytelling. I mean, do you see yourself as a storyteller in those instances?
No one's ever asked me that. I like that. My wife would say yes. And I would probably have to agree. Again, it's not my story to tell. It is their story, but just as they've let me in, now it's my job to take that and to do something with it. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely fun. It's a fun part of the job. Um, on occasion, I'll get called on it and say like, oh yeah, like that's never happened to me. It's like, okay, we'll take it out, no big deal. But I do think it is kind of within my nature to yeah to tell some stories, and I think in the visualization space I think it could benefit.
Yeah, I mean, as you were working me through the visualization process, it felt like you had a story down that you were kind of set to, but were also willing to kind of stray from.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
I guess when two athletes come in both experiencing visualization for the same sport,
mhm.
how do you, I mean, do you kind of work through the same script, or is it different depending on what position they play or whether they're a freshman versus a senior?
It's all different. It's completely different, and that's I think what helps keep it fresh for the practitioner or for me, whatever. um, but that info gathering part is where it starts to change, right? Because you've got the senior pitcher, you've got the freshman pitcher. They may have the exact same concern. In fact, they may be 1 and 2 in a lineup or right next to each other in the bullpen warming up. Like it happens all the time. um, but the way they see it can be a lot different as well. And sometimes the things we're hyper focusing on can also be different. For instance, one guy might want to get his velo way up, so he's just focusing on just getting power out. Versus maybe another guy is working on his changeup, polar opposite. Hey, can we get this thing super slow over the plate? Um, so it changes. It definitely changes. But yeah, I mean, there have been a couple times when I'm like, this is feeling eerily similar. Yeah. But again, that's okay, right? Because in that case, if we've done all the info gathering and the two cases are really similar, then they're just going through this very similar concern.
So, in the event that it's not super similar, it's completely opposite, say you're working with suddenly a performer or a
Mhm,
musician
mhm.
versus an athlete, how do those consultations differ? Taking it completely outside of the athlete realm.
Yeah, so have some prior experience working with a professional ballet company, and that was kind of eye-opening in a way because there are a lot of very uh, like there are a lot of similarities between like collegiate student athletes and the dancers within the company, or professional student athletes and the or professional athletes and the dancers in the company, and yet there is that performance element of the art that is completely different than just get the ball over the goal line. I don't care what it looks like. Like it very much matters what it looks like. And so those consultations, they look different because I need to stay within my own lane and within my own expertise. Um, I'm not going to say that I'm the expert to work with everyone, um, but there are some similarities. So like for the ballet company, for instance, the visualizations, we really broke them down into different components of their performance. Like when are you going on and when are you going off? Because the visualization should start when you're still off stage, at least in my opinion. See yourself ready to go so that there's not that difference between like, oh my gosh, now I'm in it, like, you know paralysis by analysis kind of thing. It's like, no, I'm ready for this. So I don't know if I really answered it, but I mean, it's all about the info gathering and then knowing what I know. And if I don't know anything about it, it's me being honest with myself and saying like, how can I help this person? And sometimes I'm not the right person, but a lot of times they tell me enough that you can get them into it.
And then the last question that I ask nearly everyone I interview on this podcast: what is your dream job and are you doing it now?
So I appreciate the second part of that because, for I don't know how many years, 8 years, I've worked toward being in the position I'm in today. I as soon as I learned about sports psychology, I knew that the collegiate space was where I wanted to at least start and to spend a good amount of time in. It's not, to me, this isn't a stepping stone of like leaving somewhere right away. It's like, no, I want to be in college sports. I love college sports, but recognizing like, have a little bit of flexibility, Mike. Like maybe in 10 years, it's not the same way, and that's okay too. But in either case, I knew it was college sports, and I like the Division 1 level. That's just where I've spent the most of my time as an athlete and all my training. And um, I'm an avid trail runner still, so like I'm literally looking at the Tucson mountain range outside of my like office at home, and it's like I get to live in a really cool place and do a really cool job with people who also are really invested. So I'm not just saying that in case like one of my administrators is listening to this. Like I'm really not. Like I have pinched myself like every day, like knowing that this is my job.
Oh, I love that. Is there anything else about your story that you think that I missed talking about or that you would like to plug? I mean, your services, how can people in the Tucson area get involved with you if they see that you could help them?
Sure. Yeah. Nothing really major to plug. They can find my website at clarkperformanceconsulting.com. And from there, you can pretty much find anything you need to. I'm on social media. If you Google my name and sports psychology, it generally pops up. And the reason that I really don't have heavy things to plug is one, because my work at Arizona is really where I pour a majority of my attention and time. Just the nature of the beast. It's a lot. But also because I don't ever try to force the relationship with anyone I work with outside of here. To me, it really is all about starting the conversation. I don't know if that's like a consulting cliche at this point or not, but like that's literally what I tell people when they're like, "Hey, I got someone who might want to work with you." It's like, give them my phone number and have them call me, and we'll chat for 5, 10, 15 minutes to see if it's going to be a good fit. Because some people are looking for very specific things that I may not offer, or I may not be able to do, just given my role here, and there are certain compliance rules. But sometimes the people are a good fit, and in which case, to me, that's a good place to start the relationship of a no pressure little phone call. Let's chat, and if it's good, let's schedule something. So, I don't know. That's kind of how I go about it.
And is there anything else that you think that I should know about you, the work that you do, how you got to Arizona? I mean, is there anything else as we close this interview down that you think that I need to know?
Hmm. Eh, no, I think you did a really nice job. But I think
Thank
you
you.
took a deep dive into my background and into my life. I mean, we could sit here and spin our wheels about interventions all day. Like, I really like acceptance-based interventions, and I'm a big values guy. But that stuff all came out naturally anyway. So, no, I think we got it.
Awesome. So can I just get either a headshot or something, a picture of you consulting with someone or a team, something that I can use for social media?
Yeah, for sure. I'll
You
look
can either
through.
just drop it. Some people have it right on hand and they drop it in the chat, or you can just email me. That would work as well.
Let me see here. If I do have something readily available. I recently had to get a new computer, which like,
You're going through a lot of changes recently, aren't you?
yeah, yeah. Let's see. I finished at Arizona, or finished at Oklahoma, got married, bought a house, went on a honeymoon, came here. My computer broke, and we finished this office 15 minutes before our call.
My God.
So yeah, no, that's literally my life right now. Shoot, I don't know where it all is. I will email you something.
Okay. So
I don't.
your interview is going up in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So you have a little bit of time, but obviously sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, I'll just go through all my old emails and stuff like when we get off, and I'll shoot you an
Awesome.
email.
And
No, that
then
Go
I'll
ahead.
get back to you once this is published.
Okay, cool. Do you have anything that you like for like me to do? Like, because I'll promote it on social and stuff,
Yeah.
but like, are there things that you do like or that you don't like in that world?
No, I mean, I post twice on Twitter and twice on Instagram. It's the same content, but just kind of repurposed. So if you can just retweet or share on your Instagram story, that's what most of my guests have done, and it's worked
Mhm.
really well. I mean, I'm not asking to for you to put out like a whole post on your Instagram, but some people have because
Sure.
they really appreciate what I do. It
Yeah.
doesn't really matter to me. I just
Mhm.
appreciate any share on your part.
Right. I probably would post it. So how I've done it in the past is, and I don't know if you feel comfortable with this, but in the past I've gotten like an audio clip that I've been able to like rip and put on my own post, and obviously I give you credit and your
Yeah.
put your stuff
Sure.
on there. Is that something you do, or is that you don't?
Yeah, so the way that I do my social media, I'll have one post that's just a graphic. It will have your headshot or whatever picture you choose to send to me. It'll have what episode it is, and then also the name of the episode, how you can find it on Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud. And
Mhm.
then it'll just say closer mentality across the top. It's a very basic graphic. And then the next post will be up to a minute of video footage. So a nice quote that you have that I've pulled from the interview. So if you want to use that post, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, cool. So, but you wouldn't want, and I don't know. So I'm kind of going through like I wouldn't say rebranding so much of my own stuff, but like I'm posting just a lot less because like I'm slammed
Yeah.
here. Like it's just a ton. And so I don't know if I'll do this or not, but how what I was doing was like literally asking for like the raw audio and then cutting out an audio clip. Could you
Yeah.
do that, or do you not do that?
I mean, I edit everything.
Yeah,
So this video in its entirety will not be what gets posted.
right.
So everything, I mean, normally the audio clips end up being about a minute to a minute and a half of what I pull anyway. So I normally just choose a really good one that ends up going into the eventual episode and put that with the video footage on Instagram and Twitter because it gives a good visual as well as an awesome soundbite from whoever I brought on.
Yeah.
And that's normally the best audio from the interview.
Okay.
Um, but obviously, if it's not under a minute, I mean, you can only post up to a minute on Instagram without it going to your reel. So I try to keep it under a minute, whatever I decide to post.
Got it.
But if you're looking for a longer form quote, I mean, I can send you one that I really like that doesn't fit the Instagram criteria.
No, no, no. Whatever fits the criteria, that's going to be great. And
Okay.
then, yeah, I'll probably just repost
Okay.
whatever you create. I'm not trying to be picky about it.
No,
It's
no, you're good.
like trying to promote it and do all that good stuff. So
Yeah, you're actually the first one who has asked me about my side of of the content that ends up being produced. So I'm happy to just work through it with you. Yeah, it's a pretty basic schedule of posting from my end.
yeah,
And that about a minute video clip that ends up being posted on Instagram and Twitter is normally one of the best sound bites, if not the best, of the interview. And it ends up being in the actual episode. And
right.
that always gets posted anyway. So if you just wanted to repost that, that's probably what I would end up sending you anyway. So it
Yeah,
works.
cool. Perfect. Yeah, no, there there is so much that sports psychologists in our field don't do. And if we do it, it's not well, it's not done well. And so I think like you are really well positioned as the field grows and we all learn about things to like do some really cool stuff. I thought about that with like advertising and marketing as well, because like it's like the same thing with every single person, and it's I don't know if it always works. So yeah, I'd be curious later on down the road to pick your brain to see, maybe even just off the air, like what you've noticed change over time.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I'm in this Purdue sports psych listserv, and there's a lot of conversations that go on throughout that. But one of them was this sports psych in the media special interest group that ASP had collected sports psychologists from. And so
Mhm.
I was like, can I just be in on this Zoom while it's happening? And I ended up kind of helping them with Facebook marketing and how to promote their private practices. And it was just so interesting because very few of them that were in that SIG actually had it down.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, not at all. And without my wife being in marketing, like I would have zero idea like about any of this. And I'm not saying I'm a genius about it either. So yeah, why I never asked why sports psych for you? Why are you interested in all this?
Yeah, so I went to West Virginia
Mm.
and I was a double major in broadcast journalism and sports psychology. So I came in as a journalism major, and fall of freshman year, I knew that I didn't want to leave sport. But what I didn't realize was WVU has one of the only undergrad sports psychology programs in the country.
Yeah,
And
right.
I just stumbled into it.
Mhm.
And so I added the double major spring of my freshman year. And then I ended up graduating in 2019 with 2 bachelor's degrees. And at the time, most of my classmates were like, Julia, what are you going to do with these things? Because I mean, broadcast journalism is very traditional, and sports psychology, it's not really something that has a lot of um, jobs, if any, right
Right.
out of a bachelor's degree because
Right.
you're simply not qualified.
Right.
And so some of my journalism classmates were going on to smaller news stations and something in front of or behind the camera. And then my sports psych friends were going into straight into grad school. And neither one of those was specifically what I wanted to do. But
Yeah.
I've loved storytelling since I
Mhm.
was super small. And that's what drove me to journalism. But I also think that the mental health component of elite performance is not talked about nearly enough.
Right.
And so I was thinking, okay, if one person is dealing with this, what would happen if I got their voice out?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then that, I mean, 30 episodes later, I have this thing. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I didn't want this podcast to be just a question and answer,
Right.
because I wanted it to also use my journalism experience and turn
Mhm.
it into a documentary
Mm.
about sports psychology, because there was nothing else like that out
Yeah.
currently. I mean, ESPN 30 for 30s and E60s do a great job chronicling a documentary of an athlete, but
Mhm.
nothing was specifically mental health or mental performance based.
Mhm.
And to this day, I'm still the only one doing something like that in this style that I am. And I think that the people that have trusted me with their stories are unbelievable.
Right. No, and that's how I feel often in therapy, that like you've trusted me with this. Like now, like it's my job to do something good with this, and my job is to help them, not to promote it. But I hear exactly what you're saying, I think. And that is something that one of the reasons that I did agree to it, because I was like listening to other people's and I was looking and I'm still connected with Alex pretty closely. And I was like, that does feel different than someone who's just like grilling me and then like, does anyone actually want to listen to that, like, but it's entertaining if it's like in a more, I don't know the style, I don't want to botch it, but more E60 30 for 30 kind of feel. So yeah, I
Yeah, for
know,
sure.
I like it.
Yeah, and I'm putting out an episode today, later today. It's the part 2 of a story about a Paralympian, a
Mm.
para alpine skier. So I have him and his guide on.
Oh,
And
cool.
part 2 was about 43 minutes. And so
Yeah.
I had to break it into 2 parts, and it's just been amazing. I mean, I've had professional athletes and Paralympians and
Mhm.
coaches and sports psychologists like you who are embedded in athletic departments and helping those athletes specifically. And I think that in order to do my job well, I have to have a diversity of guests. And I
Yeah.
think that it's at times difficult to get athletes to look at what I do and say, I feel comfortable in sharing my story, not only
Mhm.
with Julia, but knowing that it's going to be disseminated into the internet forever.
Right.
But up to
Right.
this point, I mean, I haven't had that issue.
Cool. Yeah. No, it's awesome. And like I mentioned earlier in the actual show, like I think that we're doing a nice job of breaking down that stigma, and not making it a huge deal, but it'll be there. I think it'll always be there. It's just how much can we empower people to manage it. So that's awesome. I'm glad people are receptive.
Yeah, I just think that the work that you do is so important.
Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate hearing that, because a lot of times it's behind the scenes, like stuff that, you know, you can tell it matters to the athlete, and then they leave and you're like, oh God, this is a lot. So appreciate it.
So I will get back in touch with you in, I believe, 2 weeks, just to promote the
Yep.
episode, and
Cool.
we'll talk soon. I'm done with all of my questions, and I'm glad that you came on and talked today.
Hey, I'm glad that somehow through the grapevine we got connected, and
Yeah.
yeah, Dolores is wonderful. I don't hear you taking any offense to it. She's just she's the director of the top sports psych training program in the country, and also swamped with like all of her stuff. So like for her, I was actually shocked when she reached out to me and was like, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this. You want to do it? And I was like, yeah, like for sure. And I was like, you don't? She's like, no, I do. I have zero time. And
That was what she responded with. She was like, I
yeah,
love this idea, but I don't have time. Would you be interested in talking to Mike? And I was like, absolutely.
yeah,
Sure. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah. No, she's wonderful. If you can ever connect with her at Asper or anything else, like she's a good person to get to know.
Yeah.
Cool.
Is there anyone else that, while we're on, you think that would be a nice guest for this show?
So I have someone that immediately popped in my head, but like what it would be any genre, like athlete or provider, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, so I do kind of a nice mix of elite athletes, collegiate athletes, coaches, and sports psychologists, because I think that gives a well-rounded kind of understanding of the storytelling aspects of sports
Mhm.
psychology. But if there's anyone, like we were talking earlier about a dietitian that still comes in contact but is not directly related to the mental health and well-being of an athlete, I'm totally open to those as well.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. Well, okay. Well, loaded answer. I don't know if any of the dietitians I've worked with would be like great, like show people. Like I don't know if they just interpersonally, maybe they would be, maybe they're not. But so of course I fall back to what I know. There are two people. If you're looking for eating disorder specific, he's a psychologist. He's not a dietitian. Riley Nichols. Have you heard of him yet?
No, I haven't.
He's based out of St. Louis. If you type in Riley Nichols St. Louis, I'm sure it'll pop up. He was formerly with the Victory program, so you'll see that in his bio, or if you're trying to sort through it. He is in many ways respected as like I won't say a top. He's also like fairly young, but in our field, whenever there's like an eating disorder thing, like people go to Riley because he is very knowledgeable and definitely very respected. Works with a lot of Olympic athletes, college athletes. He's in his own private practice now. Um, really good person. He led a training for me when I was at Oklahoma, and really sharp and a
Cool.
good person. So that's someone, and even if you don't want another psychologist, but he would be someone that would know a lot in the eating disorder world of someone to connect you with.
Yeah, I mean,
And if
the
not,
eating disorder episode that I did was so interesting.
yeah.
So I mean, if I could have someone else from the eating disorder sphere, that would be really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And or Carrie Guest. He's got a good online presence. He's like a fourth year doctoral student. So I don't know if you're ready for that, that if you want to only have professionals or not. He does do his own private practice stuff. Um, let's see. Okay, well, yeah, well, okay, I'm trying to think of other people, but they're not really sports psych or sport related at all. Carrie's awesome. We connected to IMG. We both were mental conditioning coaches there, and I don't know. You can look up into him and see. If not, no skin off my back. But he's another good dude who knows his stuff for sure.
Cool. Yeah, I'll look into both of those and see if they're a good fit. I figure that they will be. Um, but this industry is so small that it's fun to see other people kind of recommending and referring me to their colleagues, coworkers, and past coworkers as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no short of people of other just like straight up sports psychologists I could think of, but to fit a niche, I don't know, like they're whatever. So cool. Alrighty. Well, hey, this was fun.
Yeah, thank you.
And low pressure. So thanks for setting up a nice call.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to it. I'm excited to put together your episode. I think it's going to be a really good one.
Cool. Alrighty. Well, I will see you. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.